Let me introduce. He is Syed Kumail Zaidi, the mind behind all that interview series. He generates kind of good questions and asks various questions to you to learn about this. And in future, he is intended to go to law school. And my name is Shamsher. I'm a PhD in structural bioorganic chemistry, and I'm working as a postdoc fellow at Harvard School of Public Health. And as Kumail mentioned, he is Mr. Hager, his physics teacher.
He graduated from
photo shooting on
in electric engineering.
Yeah. So let's start with Kumail's first question.
I remember reading an interview that you gave to a guy named Tony Jones in April 8, 2002. And then you mentioned, he asked, and Tony was going around and asking intellectuals that, who do you think is a terrorist? Who do you consider a terrorist, Israel and Palestine? And I remember reading your point of view, and you said, they both are terrorists, but Palestinians are very small kind of terrorists than Israelis, US-backed Israelis. So my quick question on you, I remember a very first interview that you gave me. It was, you told me that the definition of terrorist has been misused a lot. It's not really used, as much. I would like to know, what do you consider a terrorist, or what is your definition of a terrorist?
Well, I've actually taken a very conservative stance on this. I started writing extensively books and articles on terrorism in the early 1980s, around 1981. And the occasion was that President Reagan had taken office and declared that a focus of U.S. foreign policy, a major focus, would be a war against state-sponsored international terrorism, which his administration and he described as return to barbarism in our times and plague of the modern age and other very impressive rhetoric. And I've written quite a lot about it, spoken a lot about it, and what I did was use the official U.S. government definition in the U.S. Code, in Army manuals. British government definitions approximately the same. And if you use those definitions, which I think are pretty reasonable, they sort of capture the usual sense of terrorism. It's basically a calculated violence directed against civilians for the purposes of intimidation or sometimes destruction, guided by ideological goal, political, religious, economic, whatever it may be. There are various modifications, but that's essentially the gist of it. Well, the problem with that definition is that it's unusable. The reason it's unusable is that if you apply it, it follows almost immediately that the United States is a leading terrorist state, and that Ronald Reagan was maybe the leading terrorist of the 1980s. And since that conclusion is not acceptable, there's got to be something wrong with the definition. So since that time, right through the 80s until today, there have been many efforts to try to define a concept of terrorism that will be usable. Now, nobody puts it this way, but that's essentially what lies behind it, because these definitions are perfectly usable, except for their conclusions. And there are academic conferences and scholarly works and UN conferences and so on, trying to define terrorism more precisely. And it's regarded as a very hard task, and it is, because it's extremely hard to craft a definition of terror which will apply to their terror against us, but not to our terror against them. That's difficult to do, so yes, it's a hard intellectual topic, but I continue to use the same definitions. And in fact, one of my books cribbed from St. Augustine, who I think gave the proper answer very precisely. St. Augustine tells a story about a pirate who's captured and brought to Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great asks him, how dare you disrupt the seas? And the pirate says, I have a small boat, so I'm called a pirate. You have a big navy, so when you disrupt the seas, you're called an emperor.
Huh.
And St. Augustine says that the answer of the pirate was elegant and accurate, and I agree with it. And the book is called Pirates and Emperors, and it's about the retail terror of the pirate and the wholesale terror of the emperor. So that's considered outrageous, of course, because the party line is that we're pure and innocent and do all the right things, and they are terrible and monstrous and the plague of the modern age.
So what is the role, what about the pirates in Somalia and all these Russians?
Pirates in Somalia.
So are these terrorists?
Let's take that. You could say that.
Let's
Take a little. Let's look back a little.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I won't go all the way back. There's a horrible history, but just take the last few years. After a terrible record, there actually was a period of peace in Somalia under the Islamic group, I forgot what they called themselves.